Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and as always, I truly appreciate you tuning in. This episode of the podcast, well, we've got a change of seasons happening, or happened, rolled into spring, and with that, always seems to bring that turbulent weather. Always seems to bring a bit of storms at the start as things start to settle down, and lots of wind, lots and lots of wind down in Melbourne. So, what does that mean for us with bonsai? It means that we've got to be careful with our watering because the wind definitely dries out your trees a hell of a lot more than what you think. But secondly, this is where securing your trees becomes number one priority for you. I've had a few blow off the benches, as I think most people have. We had wind the other day of up to, they were reporting 160 k's an hour. So just a gentle breeze coming through the yard. Had a few trees get knocked off the bench. One of them was freshly repotted a couple of months ago, and the new soil on one side of the pot all came out. But this is why I keep stressing you've got to secure your trees in the pot really, really firmly, because the root ball remained intact. I didn't have any issues with regard to the tree falling out. The tree was nice and steady. I could pick it up by the trunk, in fact, and the pot stayed in place. So I just put a bit of fresh soil back in around the root ball that had fallen out, topped up a little bit of sphagnum moss, resecured it to the bench, made sure it was tied down nice and firm this time, and did a double check on all the other trees. As a help for you, if you're hunting around with what should I use to tie my trees down with, and you're stuck, just grab something like 2.5 mil aluminium wire and just wrap it around the bench and the pot and just fasten it. Get that nice and tight, because the wind and your tree, I really truly doubt. Well, I've never had it happen in my tenure as a bonsai enthusiast. I've never had a tree get blown off the bench that's been secured with aluminium wire. So that's a really good thing to do. You don't need to go and buy fancy straps and tapes and whatever if you don't want to, or if you need to do it quickly, because the wind seems to get up and down pretty fast these days. If you do need to, just that little bit of aluminium wire will really help you. All right, so with the podcast, now I've got through that public service announcement. I'm going to be talking a bit more about fertilising because, hey, it's that time of year and it's on everyone's mind and you should be doing it. And I'm trying to get in at the start of the fertilising period, so we can talk about, last week was talking about the raw stock with fertilising, and this week I want to talk a bit more in depth about like period of time after repotting and stage of development and all that sort of stuff. So that'll be a main part of it, and also a bit more about what's going around the yard, because hopefully what I'm doing can help you guys and gals to plan on what it is that you're doing around your yard. So all right, well, without any further ado, let's get into it. Fertilising part 2 for the podcast. All right. This one, when I was writing my notes and preparing for it, I was thinking, how do you know when to fertilise? How do you know how much to fertilise? And what's the strategy? What are you trying to do with fertilising your trees? Obviously, first and foremost, always health and happiness of the bonsai, and that comes with offering them fertiliser. But then it's, okay, well, what are we trying to achieve as part of our plan? Because it comes back to that plan. What are you trying to achieve, and how can using the different tools that we have at our fingertips, and I don't mean like your scissors and all that sort of stuff. I mean things like fertilising and watering and positioning and all that sort of stuff. How can we use that? How can we harness that to ensure that we get the best result possible and our tree takes that step forward, if not 2 steps forward, and how do we plan for the future with it? And one thing you'll often read or you'll hear is, as your trees become more and more refined, you give them less fertilizer at the start of the growing period, and that's true to an extent. All right, so I just think it needs to be sort of expanded on a little bit, and sort of explained a little bit more about why we do these things, which is what I think we all need. Well, I know it's what I need. I hate that. Hate's a strong word. I don't like following blindly what someone else says. So I don't want people to just blindly follow anything that I say without understanding what it is and then interpreting it and using it in your situation with your trees. So if you take a really advanced tree, like a finished tree, and I know you might listen and go, well, that's not me. one day it will be. All right, so let's take that extreme. Last week we talked about stuff that's just starting its journey. Let's talk about stuff that's right at the pointy end where it's nearly finished. Right, it's getting to the point where it's really, really looking fantastic, and your plan's maybe got 2 or 3 little steps left in it, and then it is perfection. All right. When a tree gets to that point, by giving it fertilizer early during the growing season, we'll talk specifically about nitrogen. Okay, when you provide nitrogen to your trees during that early growing period of spring, it can get a bit out of control. It can be a bit too much growth, or a bit too aggressive. And as you know, the longer something gets, the thicker it gets, which means the coarser it becomes, which means on a really refined tree with fine, delicate branching towards the tips, it can destroy that for you pretty quickly. So therefore, the general rule that you'll hear is advanced trees, don't fertilise them at the start of spring. Just wait till they've got their beans out of their system, like they've done their big push of growth and they're starting to slow down. Getting towards summer, everything's starting to calm down a little bit more. Leaves have hardened off. There's no real excitement with new buds starting to push from all over the trunk like there is at the moment. Then you give them some fertiliser. And I agree with it. I do. I 100% agree with that approach to fertilising those refined trees. But what you've got to take into account too as a secondary item is the period of time from repotting. All right, so you know how much I dislike things just being followed because you've got them written down on a piece of paper, or you've heard them, or you've seen them, or someone's told you. What you've got to take into account too is the period of time between repotting. So let's say that tree that we're talking about, that bonsai that you've got an image of in your head that's perfection. It's just great. And take black pines out of this for now, because they're a tree and trees that we're going to be candle cutting or decandling. Okay, take those out of the picture for the moment, because let's focus something on with leaves. Okay, that's pure and simple, just with leaves, not needles, because they're a whole another discussion. But with this tree that you've got in your head, let's say the period of time since repotting was 5 years. Let's go the extremes. So it's been 5 years since this tree's been repotted, and it is struggling. It came out of autumn and went, and you looked at it and went, geez, there's not much growth on this thing. It's not looking so great. All right, I really should have repotted it, but you haven't. So it's been a long time since, this thing's had its roots worked and been freshened up. So it's very tight. It's very hard to get water in there. And if it's hard to get water in, it's hard to get nutrients into this tree. If you hold back the fertilizer on that tree, there's a really good chance you're going to get a hell of a lot of dieback on that tree, if you haven't already. If the tree hasn't already suffered to the point that as it wakes up for spring, you see a significant number of branches dead on this tree. If you just blindly follow that regime of doing nothing until just before summer, like you've heard and you've been told, I guarantee that tree is going to take a massive hit and go backwards a long way. So what I would do in that circumstance is I would look at, roughing up the soil a little bit, taking maybe a top layer off soji, which we talked about in autumn period. But if you've just realised it's too late, you've missed the boat for repotting, and this thing really should have been done, scrape a top layer of the soil off, put a little bit of new stuff on there, maybe a top centimetre of soil, put new soil on there, and start the feeding early. Start looking to push this tree and provide as many resources to it as you possibly can to try and maintain it at that plateau without going backwards a step. So that's where fertilising can be introduced early on a super advanced tree that hasn't been repotted for quite a significant period of time. Let's flip it. Let's say the tree has just been repotted. All right, like it's a month, weeks, whatever it is since it's been repotted, and this tree has suddenly gone, woohoo, look at all this space. I've got so much room to grow roots, right? So much room for activity that you can see that this thing's going to go berserk, and there's going to be lots of new growth there that you're going to have to manage, and it's just going to be like giving a teenager a bloody jar of jelly beans. It's going to go berserk, right? So you're going to need to make sure that with your fertilising that you are very mindful that you definitely hold back on this is on a highly refined tree, right? Not a tree that's in development that you're still trying to get more out of. This is that really refined, show quality masterpiece that's in your collection. So therefore, the repotting's encouraged or brought about a rejuvenation of the tree, which is going to result in rapid root growth, rapid foliage growth. You're going to need to make sure that your strategy for pruning is spot on, where you're constantly pruning stuff that's getting outside the silhouette. You're not letting things extend. You're not letting them get coarse. You're reducing anything with a long internode that comes out because it's useless to you, and you're just managing the growth. You don't want to go giving a tree like that a nitrogen fertilizer that's going to encourage more foliage mass, because it's going to push that tree further back. So the earlier example was not fertilizing and setting the tree back. This example is fertilizing the tree and setting it back. So there's a bit of a thread there where you want to make sure we're taking those steps forward by using fertilizer of these trees more appropriately. Let's pick one smack in the middle. It's been 2 years since the tree's been repotted. The roots are nice and solid. You flip the coin as to whether you repotted it this year or whether you let it go one more year, because it is right at the pointy end. I do this every single year with a lot of my trees, where I sometimes look at them and go, I think about, has there been dieback? What do the buds look like on the tree now just before they start to expand and open up? Does it look like there's going to be some dieback? Does the tree look like it's struggling? Should I repot it? Is it the right thing to do? Sometimes, yes, I will repot. Other times, no, I will hold it and I will push it back a little bit further and say, no, I want more fine growth. So then with trees like that, I'll look at it and I'll go, you know what, I'll let the growth start coming out. It's spring, so the buds have opened, the leaves have popped out.
We'll be right back.
Here's a question. How far would you go to find the person who means the most to you in all the world?
This is The Loved One, an anthology drama series set here in Glasgow. Pink is looking for her daughter in this strange city. The truth is elusive, but there is so much to discover. 6 Scottish writers, interwoven stories, immersive music and sound design. This is The Loved One.
I'll start doing my pinching early on these trees, trying to not get elongation, try and keep everything nice and short, nice and compacted. But then I'll have a look at the tree and I'll say, has it run out of puff? Like, there's only so many resources this tree can have stored in autumn. Does it look like it's going to make it all the way to just prior to the summer period? Or do I need to step in and take action on this thing? And, there's times where I'll look at trees like that and I'll go, okay, I've done my first round of pinching. There's some leaves on there that haven't got a centre shoot, like they've just put out a first pair of leaves, but there's no centre shoot to push out there. It means the tree's going to be struggling a little bit more than what I'd hoped. Fertilise it now. Get in there early. So I can, because I know the trees, I'm really close to them. I've spent a lot of time with them. I feel like they're an extension of me. I can interpret and understand and see where they're at. If I get one of these trees that's 2 to 3 years from repotting, it's just putting out growth, and all of a sudden the pests start to come in and start to cause a bit of an issue, then I know that tree's a bit on the weaker side. Therefore, I've got to step in, I've got to take action on this thing, and I've got to protect it. I've got to put it under my wing and make sure that I'm going to try and boost the tree's strength as much as I can, maybe change my strategy with that pinching process, let a few things extend and then look to get them removed. Maybe make sure I'm on top of the pest management as well, keep an eye out for fungal issues. Just watch out that summer's coming around the corner with some stinking hot temperatures. So what I want you to do is, when you think about fertilising, I've got a really simplistic approach. 1 tea bag per tree per month during the growing season of spring and autumn, but double it up during autumn. So that means you've got 3 months of spring, that's 3 tea bags. You've got 3 months of autumn, that's 2 tea bags per month, that's 6. So that means effectively, as a real baseline, 9 bags of fertiliser per tree per bonsai in my yard. And I encourage, when you first start bonsai and when you're trying to find your feet with things, that's a really great way to do it. Start of the first day of the month, when you click over the clock into that season, get on it, start doing it. Use the first of the month as your catalyst to get off your bum and actually go and feed your trees. But as you start to get to know your trees and you develop this relationship, this love for them and this care for them, then you've got to be able to interpret where they're at and not just blindly follow instructions or guidance without truly knowing what the results of it are going to be. And I encourage you, when your trees are developing, fertilize a few differently and see what the results are. And then you'll get to understand how your trees are growing and how you're looking after them and what the impact of what you're doing with them is. And then as they get more and more towards that pointy end of being, perfection, absolute perfection, then you know exactly what you have to do. So fertilizing, yes, it's time to fertilize. I'll reiterate again because I've seen a little bit of chatter about different types of fertilizer and, low nitrogen fertilizers and high phosphate fertilizers and all that stuff. I don't agree with any of that. I don't follow that rule. I have it, it's very simple what I do. It's repeatable. It's predictable. I know what I'm going to get. I know if I multiply it up, what the impact's going to be. So I encourage you with your fertilizing too, take notes, keep photos, measure, monitor, but make sure whatever it is that you're doing, you can repeat the following year or the next time that you fertilize, because that's where you'll really, you'll take those steps forward, and your bonsai journey is going to be so much more enjoyable knowing or being able to predict within a certain range exactly what's happening. So there we are, fertilizing part 2, eh? Around the yard at the moment. Right. Spring's here, everything's looking great. A few trees are slower than others, especially ones that maybe haven't been repotted. The ones that have been repotted seem to kick off a little bit earlier than everything else, but everything's looking great. No heart palpitations as I walk past trees and went, oh, it still hasn't got its buds out yet. What's happening? No, it's all good. Everything's okay around the yard. Everything's looking lush. It's got a great feel about it. The blossoms seem to have disappeared. A lot of the trees around the yard that aren't bonsai as well have popped their foliage out, and it's just got a really nice feel to it. Downside, you've got to mow the lawns a hell of a lot more, but hey, that's spring. But it's the start of a busy time where harnessing spring's resources or managing spring's resources with your bonsai becomes really important. So things like pinching, candle breaking, all that sort of stuff, they become daily activities for me, and they should for you as well. So it's not something where I don't consider this to be work, what I do right now, even though it takes hours. It takes a long time. But each tree in itself might get a couple of minutes, especially if you're doing something like candle breaking on your pines to try and balance the resources, push resources down to the weaker buds like I've talked about before. Candle breaking becomes one of those things that you've got to do at the right time. Don't do it too early. Don't do it too late. Do it just as the candles start to look like they're getting dimples on them before the needles come out. Once the needles come out, too late. You've missed the boat. So don't panic about it. But if you see them starting to elongate these candles, and you can get in there and just take the tip off with your fingers, don't use scissors, then you can push resources further down the line to the weaker buds on those trees, and it's suddenly, the whole tree starts to grow and look nice. And then when we get to the next phase of either, candle cutting or decandling or whatever it is that we're going to be doing with those pines, then we've got a nice balance of strength across the entire tree. So that balancing of the strength or forcing resources to a certain area applies a lot with your deciduous trees, and making sure that where you don't want thickening, you're pruning. Where you want thickening, don't prune. Simple. It's really, really easy. Pinching with your fingers is great. I find sometimes the trees get a bit too dense for me to get my chubby little fingers in there, and I can do more damage when I'm doing that, and I break branches. I don't maybe pinch off quite as neatly as what I should. My nails aren't 3 inches long, so I can't get in there like a pair of tweezers and clean them up. But I do have really sharp needle tip tweezers, which I leave around the yard specifically. I'll just walk around, have my cup of coffee in the morning, pinch, go into the next tree. Then I'll leave those sitting in a pot. They're rust proof, they're stainless steel, and leave them sitting out in a pot. So next time when I come out, they're right there. And I try and everything that I do, I don't cut corners. That's not my process, but I try and make it as simple as I can. So if I think, well, I'm walking around having my coffee, that really needs to be pinched. Oh, hang on a minute, the tweezers are back in the workshop, and that's 50 metres away. Do I have time? No, just we'll do it tomorrow. And I find that when I say that in my head, that I get angry with myself and I kick myself, because you should never put something off like this. because in one day, those new shoots that are there can suddenly get very, very strong, which means that the weaker ones, the inner buds, the bud conveyor that we've talked about, that you've heard me rap it on about, suddenly gets a little bit weaker because those resources the tree's got suddenly pushed towards something you're going to cut off anyway. Whereas if I'd gone in there and I'd pinched it at that time when I was thinking about it, that was the best time for me to do it. Maybe not the best time for the tree, but it's the best time for me. And if I leave it any longer, it's just going to get worse. So I try and make it that I have the necessary tools with me when I walk out. Like, I'll give you a red hot tip. You don't have to have needle nose tweezers to do this stuff. Just when you get your cup of coffee in the morning, have a pair of scissors with you in the kitchen. Your bonsai scissors, some really nice, small, sharp ones. Just have them there so you can just grab them and walk out. If you don't use them, just put them back. Come back into the kitchen at the end of your coffee, enjoy the morning, put them back on the bench, leave them go. But if you have a second pair or a pair of anything there with you while you're walking around, I guarantee you that work will get done immediately, and it's not something you need to make a list for and allocate time on Sunday when you've got your day off to walk around the yard and go, right, okay, now I've got to get out and then I've got to prune and pinch my deciduous. It's like, I've done it all week. I don't have anything to do on the weekend. Now I can just actually live my life and enjoy myself and enjoy my trees because they're all looking great. And hopefully by then, if you do it on the Monday, on the Sunday, when it comes around, those little weaker buds have started to take off and they're getting the resources they need. So it's definitely a good time if you're trying to work on ramification. Now's the time to do it. I talked a bit before too. It's just crossed my mind. Sorry, it's going to be a bit scattered for a second. I talked about fertilising with your pines and that sort of stuff, and building the strength for decandling and for species, pine species like Scots pines and radiators where they're going to be candle cut. If you've got trees that you're going to be defoliating down the track, like let's say it's a trident maple, and you do want to have that on the radar for defoliation or a fig or something like that, ficus, then I'd suggest building its strength up with fertilising as well. Early. Plan for it. So don't really worry, and you're not concerned about leaf size now because the plan is build the strength of the tree, let it grow, get to the right point when defoliation happens and go through and do a partial removal of foliage or a complete removal of foliage, whatever your choice is. So then the tree's got the resources ready to go to pop the next set of buds and give you a second flush of growth for the year. So that's where fertilising can be done. All right, so swinging back now, talking about weather and that sort of thing too. I know last year I talked about was talking about a potential hot summer. So therefore, defoliation for a lot of my trees was off the cards, off the table. I think this year is going to be the same. Be the same. I did a review of the trees, had a look at the foliage, and had a look at the ramification that was achieved without doing the defoliation process for almost every single one of my deciduous trees or figs, and they look good. They look really healthy. The internodes weren't too long because I was on top of the pinching game. As I talked about in the previous session, I did manage the fertilising as I like to for these things to make sure that I try and not push too much internode length with the new growth. So they looked okay, and having seen sort of long-term forecasts and predictions about this warming and whatever else, I'm just flagging it now. I know I'm months ahead of the time that defoliation will come around, and maybe things will change. Who knows? But it's just something. But if you are, you need to get on to the fertilising part of it now. Another thing that I'm working on around the yard at the moment too is I'm very, very mindful of pests around the yard. Got a bit of bonsai travel coming up, so my eye's going to be off the ball a little bit for these things, and I need to make sure that I am prepared and ahead of the game when it comes to feeding and predicting things and making sure that my trees suddenly are strong enough to avoid or fend for themselves when it comes to the pests. So what I am doing around the yard with myself too is working with a few systemic insecticides that take a while to get through the tree system, that don't have a flow-on effect to other things like bees. So I'm pretty mindful about that. But they mean that I can sort of turn my back and be busy elsewhere and make sure that I'm ahead of it. But it's that forethought that you need to have with your bonsai, that if you are going to be away, I talked about watering systems last week. If you are going to be away, or if you've got a holiday, or whatever it is, you need to make sure that you've got plans in place for it. And that's one of the things that I'm doing at the moment. But that pruning and pinching around the yard is the number one priority. Weeding, again, is a number one priority for me. Managing the weeds that are in the pots too. Just got to make sure that stays under control, especially, like I said, being away from the trees for a little bit here and there. It's definitely something I've got to be mindful of. So spring's here, everything's rolling. Make sure that you really look after your tools. I know this sounds really minor, but dirty scissors when you're pruning things, this new growth, transference of issues from one tree to the next can become an issue for you as well. So hygiene, sharpness, cleanliness of everything. Now repotting's done, you can clean up your work area and get the vacuum in there and make sure it's pristine. Make sure it's really nice. When you finish the work, make sure you clean up after yourself straight away. And the standards you set for yourself are the standards you're gonna maintain. So if you are very lax in how you're looking after your tools, don't expect your trees to be much more than sort of half rate, because the trees have limited resources. You want to make sure that when you are cutting, they are healing as best they possibly can, surgical-like. Make sure that it is as good as you can possibly get it. Make sure your tools are nice and clean. Wipe them over with something like a bit of methylated spirits or something like that between trees, especially if you know that one of them's got an issue, and before you go to the next. Just make sure you're doing things the best you possibly can, because it's those little things now which are going to stack up on you and pay you dividends in the future, or make it that maybe your trees don't get quite as far as what they could. So make sure that you're doing the best thing by those beautiful little trees that you dedicate so much of your life towards, and that a lot of your thought goes to as well, because they're very special. Thanks for listening in. Appreciate it as always. Catch you next week. Until then, happy bonsai.